Source Nation, welcome back to Renaissance Relationship Therapy with me, your host, Life Purpose Coach Tem'ti. So, as I stated earlier, special guest tonight, Coach Troy, and just incidentally, Coach Troy has a new book coming out shortly. It's going to be available from his website, xklusivethoughts.com, but he's going to tell you a lot more about that and himself, as soon as he's mic'd up. And, in fact, he's actually ready to go. Coach Troy, are you there?
I'm here. How are you?
I am doing fine, thank you, sir. How are you doing?
Life is great. So happy that you're having me on today.
Absolutely, and we're absolutely chuffed to have you here. Source Nation, Coach Troy Spry is a heavy hitter. We were just talking about your new book, Teach Me How to Love, A Man's Journey Toward and Through Marriage. So, Coach Spry, for all of those who may not have heard of you, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your book, and what really inspires you to do what you're doing.
Oh, man, so I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. My name's Troy Spry. I got a movement called Thoughts Movement. And honestly, I'm a certified life and relationship coach. And what kind of brought me to that point was my mom passed away. And it's kind of a sad story. I always say my pain birthed my passion, right? But my mom passed away back in 2011. And my first blog ever written was called A Mother's Love, right? And so I was talking about my pain that I kind of felt when she passed away. And so from that, I started writing about what came naturally to me, which was relationships. And I realized that as I wrote about relationships, people responded very well. People wanted me to tell them more, right? So they kept reaching out to me. And so what I did was I went and got certified as a coach, and I came up with my mission. My mission is first to make people is better people equals better mates, which creates better relationships and creates better communities. So that's my why.
Right.
That's why I wake up every single morning, is I want to help people be better people so they can build healthier relationships and build better communities. So that's how my movement got started, and it's kind of taken off ever since then. So I'm excited that I'm helping change lives every single day, and I'm learning from my audience as well. So that's kind of my journey.
Absolutely, that's an amazing story, and like we've heard so many times, it's out of the pain. There's a lot of great life coaches out there, but it's the pain that really, that's your qualification. Because that's when you see the other side of life, and then if you can get yourself through it, you're now in a better position to get someone else through it,
Absolutely. It makes it so much more genuine and real.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. So we're talking about women and the things top 10 things that they need to recognize about a guy when he is given the right signs that sometimes they overlook, they misunderstand. And so I know, you're a bit of a specialist on this, Troy, when it comes to, really getting people to understand their motives and, like you said, understand the why in their relationship. And I just wanted to say, there's a lot of bad stuff that, yes, there is a lot of bad stuff that men do in relationships that we're all familiar with. And there can be also a lot of good stuff. Some of the good stuff that men do, yes, it falls beneath the radar and gets lost, meaning that, sometimes a woman may miss the vital clues that lets her know that this guy is a keeper, he still may have one or two things that he's working on, but still, with her help, these are things that any man can accomplish. So, one of the first things I wanted to speak about was a man who's willing to put you first. That's number one. He's willing to put you first. And, when a guy puts a woman as a priority, he sees her as an integral part of his life. If he puts his life first and she's an integral part of his life, then she's also first in his life. I know sometimes that can get twisted, and a lot of people can say, oh, the guy's whipped, but it's not really that, is it? Putting a woman first is not a bad thing for a guy to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say to that is I always use the term, he unapologetically makes you a priority. And so what I mean by that is, when a man gets to a certain point in his life where he feels like this woman is the one, and he makes her a priority, he doesn't apologize to other people for making her a priority. So what that looks like sometimes is, if he decides that he's going to go out with his lady instead of his boy, then he unapologetically does that. He doesn't have to make an excuse. He doesn't have to give any justification. He says, you know what, I'm going to be with my lady tonight because that's who's important to me. And he doesn't have to apologize for it. So I think that, you know, when a woman sees that from a guy, she has to understand that, you know, that's probably a guy that's really into you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Are there any ways that a woman can potentially misinterpret a man putting her first? You know, sometimes you hear about things like, oh, he doesn't give me any space, or he's always trying to do stuff, and, you know, how can that go wrong?
And I'm glad you brought this up, because I think that's one of the reasons that guys take such a long time to do such, because they're worried about being called clingy or being called thirsty, or, you know, that's the new term, thirsty, right?
Right.
So, and it gets misinterpreted, and so guys do what I call play it cool. They like to play it cool, and they try to, you know, shadow what they're really feeling. I say for guys, though, this is what I tell men and women all the time, that when it's the right person, then they'll want to spend that time with you. So that goes for both sides of it. So instead of it being misconstrued as clingy, it'll be looked at and framed as you just want to spend time with me and get to know me more. So it's all about who it is.
Right, right. Okay, so that's he's willing to put you first. The next one, number 2, he's there for you in a crisis. Now, we know guys will always show up at the good times. You know, you book the game on cable. You know, you cooked. You know, he's picking up his laundry. You know, you're about to break him off some. You know, guys will always turn up for that. But then when it's crunch time, still turns up and hangs in there and, you know, doing it to the point where you don't realize he's doing it because, you know, it's crunch time and it's all about you. So he's not going to be like I was saying, you know, turn up and expect a medal or like, you see, I'm here and keep on reminding you how much he's doing. He's going to make sure it's all about you. So you're not even going to notice how far this guy is going to make you feel comfortable through the dark hours. I know sometimes that this can seem as negative enabling. You know, anytime she calls, you run into her house and whatnot. It can seem like enabling, or even worse, it can seem like, you know, you can get in the friend zone that way, you know. But I know the bottom line is a guy turning up at the bad times is just something a good guy is going to do, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think if you're dealing with a guy who only comes around when it's beneficial to him, then it's probably the wrong guy. Because, see, what we got to think about is this. If you want a future with the guy, you know, would you want a husband that didn't show up when things were going bad? Right? You have to actually look at that, because if you call a guy that shows up in some of the bad times enabling or showing up too much, then ask yourself, what would he be like in a relationship long term, or in a marriage long term? So, you know, you got to practice for the game, right? And if that's what he decides to do, then he's probably into you, and he's probably a good guy.
How do guys? I mean, I know, like you said, you know, you have to be unapologetic about it. At the end of the day, it's your relationship. It's not like, you know, your friends are dating this person. It's you. But I know sometimes that can be a lot of pressure. You know, if a guy is with his boys and they're psychoanalyzing a girl and being like, come on, dude, she's like calling you every 5 minutes. You're always running there. I mean, how does a man even draw the line for himself when me supporting her is turning into me enabling her? How does he make that tough call to know when to pull back if he needs to?
Well, I think he'll get the vibe, number one, from the woman. I think women are very good at giving off signals. You know, they might not always say it, but they give off really good signals. And they'll say, well, I'm okay. You don't have to check on me that often. You know, but I think the other part is it should be like a reciprocal relationship, right? You check on me, I check on you. It should be like a ping pong game, not like a one-sided match. If it feels like you're overbearing, or that, you know, for every one time she calls, you call 5 times, then that might be a little bit much. You know,
Gotcha.
But at the same time, I think it's really about just simple reciprocation. I think we overcomplicate it. It should be, you know, if you give me a call, then I'll give you a call back. You know, if you plan this date, then I'll plan that date. Now, I think reciprocation is the key to all of it.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so number 3, I like this one. He doesn't judge you. You know, now you may get the woman, you know, she may like to go toilet with the door open, you know, cry when she's watching reality TV. or sing. You know, she likes to sing to you, and she can't sing. She sounds like a strangled cat. But the guy, he doesn't look at you like, what the hell? You know, he actually likes it and takes it as a sign of, look, you're doing this, you're opening up to me like this. This shows your closeness, and he appreciates it. How rare is it for men not to judge women as crazy when they just finally let go and be themselves?
Well, I think, I think it happens only when a man trusts you and he's actually in love with you, right? You know, if he makes you feel comfortable being yourself, you don't have to put on the mask all the time, then that means he's into you beyond the physical. And that's where you want to be with a guy. You want him to be with you beyond the physical and beyond the surface. I know there's situations all the time in life where, you're with a woman and she feels like she has to be made up all the time, 100%, just to make you happy. Well, if it's a situation where you're not having to do that all the time and he still thinks you're beautiful, he's not judging you, then you might be in the right place. Otherwise, if you feel like you have to impress him all the time and put your A game on all the time, then it might be the wrong guy.
Right, absolutely, and it's one of the things you said, reciprocation. It's one thing. Okay, a guy is not gonna judge a girl, and of course, it's just as important that she doesn't judge him. But there seems to be, a culture of where tit for tat, always going at the other person. What do you think is the best way that you can? If the relationship does get a bit testy at times, what's the best way to kind of like level the playing field and, chill out the situation to let everyone know, okay, look, come on, let's not judge each other. Let's accept each other for what we are. What's the best way of bringing that kind of, environment to a relationship?
I think a big part of it is just communicating those things. I think what happens so many times in relationships and when people are dating is they just fail to communicate how they're feeling about a certain thing. And so they let it boil up to the point where there's a misunderstanding that could be very easily understood. So if you just have simple communication and you say, when you do this, it makes me feel this way, instead of not saying anything at all and then wondering why it doesn't change, right? It's really about simple communication. And when you're that comfortable with someone, then I think there should be an environment there where open communication is not just accepted, but expected. When it comes to the point where it's expected, then I think you got something special.
Absolutely. Okay, number 4. He shows you how much he cares. And I can sum this one up in one word. And it's like something that we've spoken about in this show time and time again. Vulnerability. If a guy is showing you how much he cares, he's showing you his vulnerable side. Coach Troy, tell us about vulnerability and this whole thing about, whether, some people perceiving it as being weak, but what the true power of showing your vulnerable side really is all about.
Man, vulnerability is such an important part. It's a foundation to dating into a relationship. If you can't be open with someone, you can't ever be yourself and let them in on your biggest fears, your biggest insecurities, your biggest flaws, then you will never go past the surface with them. And you'll never build anything deep if you don't. So I think vulnerability is a strength and not a weakness. And so I hate the fact that it's looked at as a weakness. I think people have it so misconstrued. Vulnerability is a true strength because there's a certain level of connection that comes with vulnerability. And you'll never get that connection if you don't let someone in beyond what you just kind of quote unquote want them to see, right? You have to let them in on what really is there. And I think there's so much power in that. And if you're worried about being judged all the time, then quite frankly, you're not ready to even date. Because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, then you shouldn't be trying to build a relationship because that's a foundational component of one.
And just on a side issue, like what you said, a lot of people who are trying to date are actually not ready to date. But they don't realize that until the relationship goes past the surface honeymoon stage, and when they really have to start talking about their emotions or expressing themselves, and then that's when the difficulties always happen. It's like clockwork. And these people will keep on going through it over and over again, like trying to be like, well, why can't I find someone? Why can't I be with someone? But the truth is, anytime someone gets close, there's this uncomfortable emotional side of themselves that they're not at peace with, and it's because there's some unresolved stuff there. how do you get to tell somebody that you're not ready for a relationship? I mean, can you? Is it possible? Or is it just something that they have to figure out for themselves?
I think it's something they have to really, I think first of all it comes with knowing what it takes to be in a relationship. See, most people don't know they're not ready for one because they don't know what it takes to be in one. So if you kind of have done some research and you know what it takes, and you know, number one, that you got to be willing to be vulnerable and open to be in a relationship, if you don't know that, then you go into it thinking, hey, I can keep these walls up and still build a healthy relationship. When we all know that that's not the truth, right? So you have to be conscious of what it takes. And I think what people don't understand, the best time to prepare for a relationship is before you're in one. But what we do is we do it the opposite way. So what we do is we do it the opposite way. All we do is we get into something based off of lust, right, and the chemistry, quote-unquote chemistry, and then we realize that once the lust is gone, we don't have the skills, right, to keep the relationship going. And because we haven't done any preparation, you have to do some kind of preparation and investing in yourself and in other people in order to build a really healthy relationship. So I think that's the biggest solution, is prepare for it before you go into it.
Right, absolutely. Okay, and this is actually a continuation of number 6. Number 4. So number 5, he's kind. All right, he's kind. He's a kind guy. And what's interesting about this one is that, yeah, of course, it's a given. He's going to be kind to you, but it's more important how he shows kindness to others. You know, especially other women. You know, and sometimes even animals and children. You know, there's a way that a woman can observe how he shows kindness and how that can possibly reflect on the relationship. Am I right about that?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, because, you know, when men become vulnerable and start to love, then they become softer. I mean, we're not bred to be soft, but when we become soft, we show you how much we care. We care about little things, and we'll treat you as such. So I think if you watch how a guy treats other people, you'll understand how genuinely caring he is. So how he treats the waitress, you know, how he treats his colleagues, his family members. Because at some point, it's who you are. It's not necessarily you putting on for someone else. Who you are usually comes out at some point. And that really comes out in how you treat people in different scenarios when it doesn't benefit you. So I think those are some of the key things to look for, is how they treat not just you, but how they treat other people.
Right. And I know there's no set time, so to speak. Every situation is different. But on average, how long does it take to get to know your partner? Because, you know, we'll all put up the front. We'll turn up to the relationship at the beginning with our characters, you know, and our superficial image. But at some point, the real you has to come out. It must come out. Typically, on average, how long does that take?
Honestly, I would think I always tell people at about 6 months to a year, you start to really know who someone is, because you can't hide for so long. I mean, that first 3 to 6 months, you can kind of put on the front, you can hide a little bit, but at some point, people's true selves come out. And I think you really don't know someone until about 18 months. Until you're about almost 2 years in, that's when you really start seeing that mask come off, and because what happens is, at about 18 months, you've survived some seasons together, right? You've been through a couple seasons. See, the first 2 months, you only survived one season together. You know, that's probably the honeymoon season. So I figure if you can get through 4 seasons together, then you might know a little bit about each other.
Right. It's interesting, you know, one of the things that they say, one of these old proverbs, you never really get to know someone until you fight them. And it's weird. It's weird. And it's a hard lesson, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be hard, because if somebody's fighting you and they're not like going for the jugular and trying to gouge out your eyes, but their way of fighting is to, you know, step back and say, look, I'm going to give us time. Let's chill out. You know, that you've learned something about them, that when they're at their most intense, their most emotionally intense, they're going to act cool and not spaz out. You know, and so that's something very interesting, that everyone has to go through some fights to really, really know exactly who they're dealing with, and very interesting.
Absolutely. Conflict is inevitable, right? Conflict is inevitable in life. So if you can't manage conflict, then you can't be in a relationship.
Yeah. It's so true. So number 6, he's consistent. And I think this one speaks a little more to the maturity or the quality of the man. You know, if he can maintain a consistent stability in his own life, then it's much more likely that he'll bring that stability to the relationship. You know, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree, 100%. Consistency is the key. If someone is consistent in how, number one, how they treat you, number one, how they behave in their life, and number three, how they treat other people, then I think that you have some idea of who they are. Because I always say this: we are what we repeatedly do, right? That's a quote from I think Aristotle, right? We are what we repeatedly do, and so I agree with that 100%. I mean, think about a job scenario, right? When they look at your resume, they look for your consistent performance, and that's the same thing in life. We have to look at who someone is consistently. The other thing with consistency, there's a certain level of sacrifice, right? To be consistent with a woman, you have to sacrifice certain things, and so I think you have to pay attention to consistency because that's an acting sign of maturity.
You know, and it's interesting. You know, you brought up about what they look for in a resume, and you know, I try to tell people that, look, a relationship is a relationship. Yes, you get intimate relationships, but your relationship at work is still a relationship between you and another entity. It takes thought, it takes energy, it takes care, it takes development. And if you're doing a horrible job at work, you know, you're trying to leave early, you know, not tying up your loose ends, you know, always trying to, like, you know, never taking responsibility for anything, that can actually be a fair reflection of some of the things you'll actually do in your own relationship. So is that something that you think people should take notice of, how you are in your other relationships that you have?
Absolutely, because I don't think people just have an on-off switch all the time. You know, I think it's too stressful to have an on-off switch. Usually when you see someone that's a jerk at work, they're probably a jerk at home. You know, and so it usually is pretty consistent. And so if you ignore the fact that they are not consistent, then you might be setting yourself up. Because think about it, if that person's, you know, sweet to you at home, but he's a jerk at work, but y'all have to go to work functions together, then what? Now you are kind of pulled because you know him as one person, but they know him as another person, and now you're stuck having to take up because he's such a different person. So I think you really do have to pay attention to how people are in different scenarios and different settings.
That's a great illustration you just used. I know some people have been in that situation. You know, everyone's saying, you know, your guys are a real jerk, and all you can do is, you know, save face and defend them, and then you go home and you're like, what the hell are they on about? You know, it's not a good situation to be in. But in addition to being consistent, some people may interpret consistency as being boring. You know, being boring. This can be a problem, you know, because as a guy, look, I'm trying to do my best. I go to work every week. I make sure I bring this home. I make sure I do that. I make sure I do that. Where can the problem be fixed? Is it something that the guy can do to kind of switch it up, or is it something that a woman may have to try and be a bit more understanding, or is there some kind of middle ground?
I think it's got to be middle ground because, you know, most women like spontaneity, right? And most men like to be structured. You know, I know I'm guilty of it myself. I can be very consistent in how I do things and very habitual. Now, with that being said, I know my wife sometimes likes spontaneity. So what I have to do is certain things to remind myself to be spontaneous. And it may sound corny to you, but to me it's very useful. So I may do something like put a reminder in my phone to do something different than I normally do, right? And so here's the deal with that. She doesn't know I planned it, right? It's just, but to her it's spontaneous. So if you're that kind of person and you're honest with yourself and you know that, hey, you're pretty much a creature of habit, then you have to plan spontaneity. And I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do so that you don't come off as boring and she ends up leaving you for, you know, the young cool guy or whatever. So I think you gotta plan it. Plan it spontaneity if you need to.
Now, even with the young cool guy, you know, the young cool guy has no stability. Sure, he's a laugh per minute, you know, but then there's this roller coaster. So is it one of these things where if you're a guy and you're with a woman and she wants this roller coaster, does it speak more to her character that she wants this roller coaster ride, or is it a sign of potentially her own immaturity and some things that she's just not ready to accept the stability that's needed to make any relationship grow? What do you think?
It's definitely a sign of immaturity, and I've talked to numerous women, and they all seem to go through a phase like that where they tend to like sometimes we incorporate we correlate drama with fun, right? So we have these on again, off again type relationships. We have these up and down type mood swings. I hate you right now, but I love you tomorrow. Then when you get a little bit older, what you realize though is that inconsistency is not healthy, because it's unhealthy because it shows you that someone is immature in how they handle their emotions and how they handle situations. And so you have to get older and you have to kind of get over and redefine what fun and what spontaneity or whatever it is. You have to redefine it in your mind. So I think that's really the key to it, is redefining what it looks like.
All right, look at that. Source Nation, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Renaissance Relationship Therapy. I'm your host, Tem'ti Sahura, and I have in the studio with me Coach Troy Spry. And we are discussing, ladies, the top 10 things that let you know you've got the right guy. The phone lines are now open, so feel free to call in if you have questions or you'd like to make a comment concerning our topic. The call-in number is 619-924-0933, and don't forget to press option 1 to speak. So, Coach Troy, number 7 on the list is he wants to build a life with you, and essentially, any guy that wants to build a life with you, he's seen the long game and you're in it, and I know this is the part where, all the runaway brides, they want to start their engines now. It's like, I can't do this, it's commitment, the walls are closing in, and, they may be thinking, for real, here, what's next, the ball and chain? But in truth, building a life together for the long term incorporates fulfilling your purpose. Now you're getting into the realm of the divine, and when you're talking about, your true purpose, there is a need about a freedom, your expression for freedom. But many people don't see, don't see it like that when you're building a purposeful relationship, and how it's really actually all about freedom and not about locking anybody or anything down, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when a man starts to talk about building a life with you and doing something beyond just the moment, that's a great sign. It's a great sign because, men like to plan and think things out as well. And so if he's talking about you in that high of a caliber, then I think you should really, really be happy about hearing that. But I do agree also with what you're saying, is that when you start building something with another person, there is a sense of freedom that comes with that. It's not ball and chain. It's security and freedom is what I call it. Because I am more secure in my relationship, I can be more free in how I live in other areas of my life, right? Because number one, I have a partner to support me, but also number two, I have more resources to, so you combine resources together. But then number three, I have a higher level of focus in a relationship, so my thoughts are a lot wider spread outside of that relationship. So I'm not trying to figure out which woman to go to today and who to talk to tomorrow and all that other kind of stuff. So it opens my mind up to be free. I get to be free in all my other thoughts that exist beyond just interpersonal, relationship.
Right. And it's interesting, when we were talking about the purpose aspect of the long game, the fulfillment of purpose is so key, because it's one of the reasons, when people say, they meet each other at 21 or even younger, and at that time, they may not be aware of their purpose. What they are aware of is that the person standing in front of them looks really good. Our parents know each other. We went to the same school. Wow, we're a great fit, but of course, as you get older, you realize that that's not what defines you, the school you went to or who your parents were. You define you. Your purpose defines you. And the more you get into your purpose, then you really can start going on split paths, and you start drifting one way. And it always happens, around the age of 30 or 40, you start realizing, you know what, I love your father, or the guy says, I love your mother, but we're on two different paths. And usually in their life, people can make the right choice about the right type of person they wanted to be with in the first place. How many times have you seen that happen?
I see it happen way too often. Let's just say that. And one of the reasons is because it's again, we don't invest before we jump into something. We base everything off chemistry and lust instead of off of building a life together. And when you're not walking in purpose, then it's hard to focus, on a relationship, and it's hard to choose the correct mate. And so a lot of people, they don't choose wisely because they don't know what they need. And what most people do know, what we can feel is we can feel sexual chemistry, right? We can feel butterflies in our stomach. We can feel that nervous energy. What we can't think past is the fact that when that nervous energy is gone, what are we left with? And if we're not building something together and walking in purpose together, and that person doesn't support your purpose, then what are you going to be left with? And so we don't stop to think about it, especially at young ages. When you're 20, 21, no one tells you that, right?
Yeah,
you just kind of,
absolutely.
all you're taught is just to get into a relationship, right? No one tells you those things. So I think we have to be very diligent in finding people that can mentor us and coach us so that they know a little bit more than what we know at that time. And I think that's the key to building healthy relationships long term.
Yes, it's and there isn't enough, and again, another conversation we've had so many times on this show, there isn't enough support from a cultural aspect. I mean, you spoke about mentors. You go to other cultures or historically other cultures around the world, and, there'll be mentors in the community. They'll go through initiations. They'll go through, fraternities and sororities and learn this stuff from elders, but for a lot of us, we lack that. We don't have the mentors or the role models around us, a lot of absent fathers. And, we just get into relationships because, that's what they do I saw it on TV. They told me to get married in church. Someone said getting married would be good for me. And that's it. That's your reason. Nothing else about your purpose. And, and the fact that if you actually pick the right person for you who is aligned or can synchronize with your purpose, that can be the key to you fulfilling yourself, especially as a man. What a woman brings to the table is the key, is really the key to your fulfillment. It's so there's a lot that we're missing out without using purpose as one of the things to actually choose someone in the relationship.
Absolutely, I agree 100%.
So, number 8, handling emotions. A man who can handle your emotions is a keeper. Not just put up with them, because there's plenty of guys who will put up with emotions, close their eyes and just say, you know what, I'm just thinking about the game. I'm just thinking about the game, and let a woman talk. But that doesn't help. Nobody wants to be tolerated in a relationship. You want to be heard. And you want to know that somebody can deal with your emotions. Being able to still communicate and reason in the heat of an argument, or to understand that if somebody, if a woman does have an emotional reaction, again, not to judge her or not to condemn her, but to actually just put it in context. Okay, well, I did do something stupid. Or, you know what? I know her backstory. I know where she's come from. So something like this may hurt her. She needs time. So it's definitely important for a guy to handle emotions, right? But just like we were talking about, these are some things that a lot of men don't get to really understand. You're talking about dealing with someone else's emotions. A lot of men don't even have to deal with their own. So it's like, how do you solve this problem, Coach Troy? I'd like to think that there's more guys who can handle emotions, if a woman's going through something, but that's one where I'm not so sure there's a lot of hope on that front.
Well, so I think this is a very important concept for us to address, and here's the thing. People forget, and I think we have to come at it from this framework. We are all human beings, right? And we all have human emotions, and I think sometimes men versus women emotion gets society kind of raises us up separately to handle emotions in a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's always a healthy thing, quite frankly, but that's a whole other conversation. But I think we have to first admit that, hey, we are human beings, and so it's okay for me to have emotions, just like it's okay for her to have emotions. Now, with that being said, we have to seek to understand one another because we have been societized, right? Because we have been raised a certain way. We have to seek to understand that how she handles something may not be the same way you were raised to handle something. And because of that, we have to meet in the middle. You have to seek to understand. I think that's one of the fundamental problems with relationship right now is that no one seeks to understand. We just think people should behave the way that we behave. And that's completely false. And that's why you see people bump heads all the time. And so we really have to seek to understand one another, and we have to understand that we all have human emotion. And I think the final thing is we have to be willing to be in touch with our own emotion. Once we're in touch with our own emotion, then we don't blame other people for having emotion. So I think those are the three keys to it.
Right, absolutely. And I think it even goes back to what we spoke about earlier, you know, with the communication. You know, I know people like using this term, the love language. To understand someone's love language is to know that, you know, if somebody is, you know, and I've been in situations like that where you're having harsh words with somebody, you're not cussing each other out, but, you know, you're disagreeing about something, but they may still touch your hand while they're doing it. So, you know, take the cue and realize that, you know what, even though she's disagreeing with what I'm saying, she's still showing me that she cares. So there's no reason to kind of like you lose the plot and think, you know, oh, well, you'll say this and blah, blah, blah. So that's one of the things that, you know, if a guy can really communicate on you know, a couple of levels and read the cues, it's a really good sign that that's somebody that, you know, is emotionally mature enough to really think, yeah, you know what, I can do something with this guy. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think you have to get to a point where you're willing to communicate openly and honestly about how you feel and how they feel, right? And if you can do that and say, well, hey, when you do this, it makes me feel this way, then that person knows. So now you can understand what maybe their love language is. And once you understand a person, then you know how to communicate. Otherwise, if you expect a person to respond to everything in the same way that you respond, then, you know, you should have just married yourself. You know, you probably shouldn't have worried about getting with someone. I think that's the beauty of a relationship, is putting two people together and becoming interdependent and then learning each other. I think that's the beauty of a relationship. So I think you're right on with that.
Yeah, and it is an adventure, and it's almost like an eternal adventure because, you know, we know that the root of all of us, you know, we all have this divine aspect into us. When we start tapping into the real, you know, our true selves, you know, you're talking about, you know, there's an infinite wealth of personality, and to take that journey with somebody is it's a wonderful trip. It really is, and people just don't give it enough credit. They're trying to figure out everything about the person before they get involved. But the only thing you need to know is that mentally, we can synchronize, you know, we can communicate, we show care for each other, and then once you've got those fundamentals, then you can start moving forward and figure out the rest, you know. But people just try to figure out everything beforehand because I guess there's so much hurt out there. People don't want to be hurt no more. But there is a chance. But if you plan right, then it doesn't seem like such a big risk, you know.
Absolutely.
So number 9 on the list of things to notice about a keeper is that he fights fair. And I guess this follows on from handling the emotions. You know, if he keeps his head while you're having a disagreement, you know, he's not going to start hitting below the belt and start bringing up stuff that you did in 2005 or, you know, tell you, yeah, well, you see, that stuff that happened to you with your dad, that's why you like it, and throw stuff like that in your face. He keeps the conversation respectable, you know, but still manages to get his point across. How many men do you think know how to do this effectively?
Oh man, I think it's a uphill battle with men sometimes because of how we've been told how to handle conflict. We've been told how to handle conflict with aggression, right? With defensiveness. And so that's not a natural skill for most men. You have to really, really learn that skill, and you actually have to see it put in practice. I mean, if all you ever saw was that how your father handled, conflict was by yelling and screaming, or cutting someone down, then that's all you might know. And so I think we really do have to do, like I said, do that research, beforehand and find some mentors and find what healthy looks like before we do it, because it's going to be hard for you to transfer that into a relationship if you've never seen it or executed it. And I think that also goes to how, men are sometimes told how to handle emotion in other areas of their life besides just relationships, right? Whether it be, out on the playground, or whether it be, with some family members or people at work, all those things. So we got to really watch ourselves and how we are raising our boys to handle conflict, because it could be detrimental to them later on.
Right. And this dovetails perfectly into number 10, the last one. He's a grown-up. And, there are so many men out there. And this is why it's important. If you can find these 10, even 7 of these 10 things in a man, trust me, you're onto a winner, ladies. You are really onto a winner. There are men out there who choose not to deal with their issues. They never look in the mirror and check themselves or dedicate themselves to any kind of consistent self-improvement or, as we say, self-cultivation. They don't have a culture of self. This is a huge issue today. Men that don't have a culture of self-development. So really, how much of a big deal is it when a woman does find a guy who has a true and holistic culture? And by holistic, I don't mean rice cakes and sandals, but he's dealing with his whole self. How much of a big deal is that, Coach Troy, when a woman does find a man like that?
I think it's key. I always talk about, living a balanced life and being able to understand where your blind spots are. And you can't understand, where your flaws and blind spots are if you never self-reflect. Because if you don't do that, then what happens is you become a blamer. It's never your fault. It's always someone else's fault. And can you imagine what that would do in a relationship long term? If someone never develops themselves, then there's going to be a problem, because you're inevitably going to have conflict. And when you have that conflict, if they can't handle it, or they can't ever say that they did something wrong, then it's going to be a long road ahead in a long-term relationship. So I think you have to look for that in someone. Absolutely.
So just to recap, on the 10 things, number 1, he's willing to put you first. Number 2, he's there for you in a crisis. Number 3, he doesn't judge your quirky side. Number 4, he shows you how much he cares. Number 5, he's kind. Number 6, he's consistent. Number 7, he wants to build a life with you. Number 8, he can handle your emotions. Number 9, he fights fair. And number 10, he's a grown-up. Those are the 10 things. Mm-hmm. Again, for everyone listening, especially the ladies, for you, again, it's not necessary that a man needs to have all 10. Don't want you looking at your guy sideways now thinking, you know what, he failed on 2 of those, I may have to end this. No. Like we said, this is about building. And again, with the right guidance, with the right communication, it's amazing what both of you can bring out of each other, so you both can be perfect 10s. This is real. And I know it's interesting, this, again, tell me if I'm wrong. Your book that you have coming out, Teach Me How to Love, A Man's Journey Toward and Through Marriage. How much of these 10 pointers that we just spoke about, how much of that is actually in your book? How do you cover them? And if so, how do you cover them?
Yeah, so it's so funny. I think I touch on so many, probably every single point that we talked about today. And it was really a way of that book particularly, which is, free on my website when people go on it, is what I tried to show women was there is a journey that happens for a man when he transitions from kind of boy to man when it comes to terms of relationship. And it talks about the motivation of what a man does differently when he's treating a woman, how he treats a woman when he wants her to be his wife. It talks about the journey he goes through emotionally, which is kind of what you and I just addressed about, kind of going from being hard to having to learn how to love a woman. It talks about, a lesson for men and how we can love women differently than what we were raised to do. So some of those little small things about being vulnerable and, and paying attention to certain things that we necessarily don't pay attention to. We're not taught to pay attention to. So it takes women on a journey. I think what it does, it helps bridge that gap that we talked about, the gap